Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Legend of Korra comic review. This is going to be my early non-spoiler review for Legend of Korra Patterns in Time, the Legend of Korra comic anthology slash short story collection. Basically the Korra version of Avatar The Last Airbender, Team Avatar Tales, which came out a few years ago. Same format and style in that it is part reprint of some of the free comic book day books and then some new stories as well. So that's where we probably have to start. What's actually in this book? Because I don't think any of the marketing or official description stuff out there for this book makes it very clear at all what's actually in this book. There are 8 short stories in this book, but if you just look at the official description, you would not get the idea about any of them that are actually out there. If you happen to find a website that has the preview pages for this, you'll know that it has the 3 free comic book day books. Otherwise, they don't even make that particularly clear. So let's just kind of go through this and actually give you guys that information. So like I said, it has the 3 previous free comic book day books, not including this year's one, Beach Wars. That's not in here. You have Friends for Life, the Korra and Naga story. You have Lost Pets, the Korra and Milo story. And you have Clearing the Air, which is last year's free comic book day book, which is the Tenzin backstory book. So those 3 stories are in here. That means there are 5 brand new stories in here. So what I'll do is I'll just quickly go through and just say like the name, general idea about like what characters are involved in it. I'll give some general thoughts and then we'll go through each of these with a little bit more detail. So the first new story here is called Skyscrapers. This is the young Asami and Yasuko, her mother, story. So finally we get some Yasuko focus here. It is a rather short story. It's only 4 pages, which is a little bit disappointing because I was quite excited for this story. It's good, but I wish there was a bit more to it, is kind of the main thing here. There's only so much you can do in 4 pages when you have a character that we don't basically know anything about. It's solid, but it only has 4 pages is kind of the main thing to say here. But we'll get into what it's particularly about a little bit later on. The second news story is called Wisdom. It's only 2 pages long, but interestingly, it's about Guru Lahima. Specifically about this airbender girl who goes up the Northern Air Temple mountains to try and find him to get some of his wisdom. So it's set when he was still alive, which is interesting. It's not like, it doesn't involve any of the Korra cast whatsoever. It's just like these 2 other characters in this other era. And literally, like the title says, it's a Lahima Pearl of Wisdom about wisdom. Which is kind of interesting, but we'll see if we can discuss that without just explaining the whole story. The next news story is called A Change in the Wind. So this one is about 8 pages long, and it's my personal favorite of the new stories in the book. This one, you would say ultimately it is Jinora focused, but it is basically Jinora, Korra, and Asami focused. So if you're looking for the book within this volume that has the Korra Asami content in it, it is this story, A Change in the Wind. This is where you get your Korra Asami kind of little romantic scenes, but it's also where you get your Jinora character focus, and I think it's just a really well done character story here because you get a little bit more in depth on Jinora and where Jinora is sort of, you know, like post book 4 and her more important role. I'm excited to discuss this one when we get to it a little later on in the video. Next news story is called Weaver's Ball. So this one is set during Korra's training in the Avatar compound. They don't say how old Korra is, but I would guess that she's probably 13, 14 or so here would be my guess. She has just finished she's done her waterbending training, she's just finished her earthbending training, and she's just about to start her firebending training with Master Yin. So this one is basically about, she's about to start this training, so we know Korra wants this, but the timing of this is happening right when the festival is happening, and she wants to go to the festival, and so there's that double restriction of like, she's in the compound, so is she allowed to go to the festival? Probably not. And then her teacher is like further restricting her as well. And they play on some of these ideas about kind of discussing a little bit of like just how harsh or restrictive is it for Korra being in the compound. I wouldn't say it's particularly like in depth or like deep about it, but it covers it a little bit, and it's sort of interesting overall. Not my favorite of the stories, but I appreciate what they were going for here. Last of the new stories is Cat Owl's Cradle. Interesting point about this one is that it is drawn by Alexandria Monique, who is going to be the artist on the upcoming Legend of Korra comic trilogy, which will be starting next year. So you get to see a sort of preview of her art in this Bumi and Milo focused story. So the idea here is that Tenzin is too busy to bring Milo on this trip that he said he would bring him on. So Milo sort of disappointingly kind of goes to Bumi to talk to him, and Bumi basically decides, hey, I'll bring you on that trip. And along the way, they have this sort of this discussion. It's you get a little bit more in depth on Milo with regards to, you know, him being sort of upset that, you know, Tenzin doesn't have as much time for him anymore. It's basically the kind of, you know, different generations' view on that idea of a parent who is busy and doesn't have as much time for their child. It's, you know, Bumi, we saw that reflection in like book 2 on him and Aang being busy. And here it's Milo with Tenzin being busy. But it's interesting that this is book 4 Bumi, so he's gone through the development, he's dealt with what issues he has with regards to his youth when it comes to Aang, and he's more understanding of that situation here. So he's actually quite wise here in terms of how he talks to Milo about these type of situations, and there's actually some good depth in this one that I do really appreciate. So we'll get into more detail on each of those stories in just a second. But overall, the collection. I'd say compared to Team Avatar Tales, Patterns in Time is like a vast improvement. Like, I think if you just compare the reprint books, I think there's a general similarity in quality between the 3 free comic book books that were printed here versus there. So they're kind of equal on that front. But in terms of the new content that was in each of these, I think the Patterns in Time stuff is just so much better than the stuff in Team Avatar Tales. Like, the Toph and the Boulder story was probably the best one out of this, and even that wasn't like super notable. But I think they realized with this to tackle a few more interesting topics, and they have a better sense for, I think, what fans want from short stories from Korra and, you know, Avatar, I suppose, going forward. And just, I think it's a huge improvement over that book. There are a few little issues I would have, and it's always going to happen in these kind of anthology collections about you connect with different stories and you maybe wish this one got more attention than that one. The general point I mentioned at the start, that certain characters are just not included in any of the stories here. Like I said, Mako, not featured at all in any of these. Bolin, not featured at all in any of these. But if you do bring in Beach Wars, this year's free comic, as like the other Korra short story, Bolin is at least a somewhat of a focus. He's probably like the secondary or main character in Beach Wars, if you've read that one. Mako isn't even in that one. So Mako has been left out of every short story that they've had. And it is very notable that you have situations of, like, say, there are 2 Milo-centric stories in this book of just 8 stories. There are 2 stories that are basically about Korra's past, which is good. So she's the main character. It makes sense that she has that. And I don't really inherently have a problem with that. But the variety is not helped when you're doing that, where you have like 2 things that are somewhat similar there across those type of situations. And it does feel a little bit like it is only focused on like a couple of characters, in that Korra, Asami, Jinora, Milo, Bumi, and then, like, you know, Tenzin a little bit. And then you are missing, like, it is notable, of the main cast, Mako and Bolin are the only ones who really don't get kind of any focus here. So it does stand out. Like I think it's hard to go through this book and kind of realize that, oh yeah, like you left out like half of Team Avatar. Like that's notable that you can say something like that. Like, can you imagine they did that for Avatar? Like they left out half of Team Avatar. Like, imagine Katara didn't get a story, wasn't in any of the stories. Imagine Zuko was left out completely. It feels like there needs to be a sense of like, do we as a fandom need to, in a way, do kind of what we did with Suki a couple of years ago, just make it really clear. We want Suki in more Team Avatar stuff. You can't put out covers like this, where you have all of Team Avatar except Suki. I think this might have been actually one of the things that kind of informed that sort of kind of fandom sense of like, come on, you got to do Suki much better than this. And since then, I think she has been included in a lot more Team Avatar shots. She's got her own comic and is in a much better position in general. It feels like we kind of need to do that with Mako. Bolin, I think, is ultimately fine because he gets a lot of focus in other things. Mako, it does feel like we need some attention on this character at last. So in general, I like what they do here. It's a nice selection of art where I would say, of the 5 new stories, I would say 2 of them I don't think would work that well if they got like a trilogy. The other 3 I think would work perfectly. And I think it highlights that obviously they clearly chose Alexandria Monique to do the trilogy. But I would have been perfectly fine if they got like Sam Beck from Clearing the Air, or who am I looking at here? Sam Beck also does Skyscrapers in this one as well. Jen Zhu and Kay Rhodes here, who do A Change in the Wind. I would have loved that art as well. I think the art in Wisdom, which is the Guru Lahima one, and also Weaver's Ball, are probably the 2 that I feel like they work for short stories, but I don't think that art would be something I would like for like 72 pages, like 3 parts necessarily. But in general, it's a nice grouping of art that I think looks quite good. So let's get into some of the stories in a little bit more detail. Without full-on spoiling them. It's obviously difficult because like this first one here, Skyscrapers. It's only 4 pages, but it's notable because it is, one, Young Asami, and the first content properly featuring Yasuko. And that's what's interesting about it, is that it's just those 2. Hiroshi isn't in this at all, because it's just meant to be a little kind of mother-daughter kind of scene here, where Yasuko is... They basically reveal she's an architect here. She's got 2 days left to finish the blueprints for this new skyscraper, basically this building that's going to be the kind of engineering school in Republic City. I think if you look at the blueprint that they show and compare it to the skyline of Republic City that we see, I think that building does exist. But as far as I'm aware, I don't think it's ever been noted anywhere that Republic City like has an engineering school for sure. So there's a little bit of a kind of weird connection there. But effectively, this one is just Yasuko explaining to Asami how a skyscraper is constructed. And there's some vague, like, in a way, like allusions to the idea of she's kind of like teaching Asami a little bit of a kind of lesson about something or other as we go on. There's a slight hint of like, Asami says like, is it only benders that build skyscrapers? And Yasuko points out that no, benders do these parts, non-benders do these parts. And I think the point that's kind of trying to be made here is in the same way that like Yasuko is pointing out that structure-wise, we use these sort of like triangle structures and then layer it on top of each other and stuff like that, that you need non-benders and benders working together. They never fully connect the dots that that's what's trying to be made here. And I think it's maybe just making a point that Yasuko and Asami, for sure, back then, never had any issue with like the whole bender non-bender thing. There was no like issue in the family when it came to that. That it seems like if that whenever that came about, it was purely Hiroshi feeling that way after what happened to Yasuko. But again, that feels like I'm reading into it more than I really even meant to. The main takeaway here is sort of just that, you know, Yasuko is a good influence sort of on her daughter here. She, answers her questions when asked. It shows, I suppose, an interest of Asami in architecture. It maybe highlights the idea that we typically view it as like Asami gets a lot of her sort of skills from her father, who's like the inventor and stuff like that. But here, I guess we see that in that more technical department of like designing architecture, Yasuko brought that to the place. And so Future Industries is Hiroshi and Yasuko together, which I don't think we quite knew before. And so Asami's skill set is actually like parts from both parents to a degree. I really, the main thing I get from this one coming out of it is just, I do wish this one had a few more pages, because it feels like it just stops short and never fully kind of connects the sort of lesson of the whole, this is how a skyscraper is built, with what the takeaway at the end is. And it's nice, it's cute, because you get to see how nice their dynamic is, but it doesn't really feel like there's any, like, it doesn't feel like it has a proper, like, ending as such. Like, this is what you learn from this story necessarily. I like that it exists, but I come out of it wanting a little bit more Yasuko. Definitely. But it's nice. Wisdom. Like I said, it's 2 pages, so there's only so much you can do in 2 pages. It is an air nomad, female air nomad, going up the Northern Air Temple mountains to try and find Guru Lahima to basically get some wisdom from him. And it's basically just, it seems like she notes down on paper what he says about like seeking wisdom. And it's effectively just this idea that he kind of, in a way, gives her a non-answer to the question that is actually a somewhat decent answer to the question from a philosophical point of view of just like, what is wisdom? Is it, taking something someone says and kind of like learning from it? Is it poetry? It's formless in a way. Wisdom is formless. Like, when there's nothing there, the wind is still there, but there's no wisdom, and kind of pointing out this idea of like, seeking out wisdom or something like that, is not often the best thing to do. Like, accept it when it's there, but otherwise kind of go on. Again, I don't think it's the like most amazing Guru Lahima pearl of wisdom we've ever seen before. Let me just go down to that section actually, just to get the wording exact. Wisdom is formless, for only the wind remains when all else is gone. And she notes it. I think the most notable part about this story is just that she sees Lahima then leave by flying away. Not on a glider, but the special technique of flight. She sees him just basically levitate off the ground and fly away. And there's almost this slight sense was that, given that we know the legend of him is that he like left the ground and that was the last time his feet ever touched the ground. Is this sort of where the legend comes from in a way? This was the last question someone got to ask him before he went away and then became this kind of legendary guru or something like that. It's nice. I like it addressing the kind of legend of this character. You just get a sense where like he's clearly wearing classic air nomad attire that's a little bit different maybe than you'd typically expect to see. He doesn't have hair, of course. He has the arrow tattoo, but you don't really get much of the details on what he actually really looks like. You don't get a look at his face. You just get kind of him from behind. So there's that on that front. But, and I know a lot of people really like the whole Zahir, Guru Lahima stuff. So people, I think, will like that one ultimately. And I thought it was much more effective than, say, Team Avatar Tales also had a 2-page poem with the Sokka one. This was, I think, a little bit better than that. A Change in the Wind. My favorite one, like I said, is the Jinora, Korra, and Asami focused story. This is where you get really good Jinora character development, but it's also where you get your Korra Asami stuff. Because surprisingly, none of the stories are like inherently just Korra Asami story. This one maybe starts off like it's going to be, but then in page 2, Jinora comes in and it slightly changes, but it's still where you do get your Korra stuff. And I think ultimately Korra fans will be quite happy with this one. Page 1 is very much like a Korra page. You get a lot of them having a few little romantic kind of like moments with each other. And then they address it a little bit later on in the story as well in a nice way. But the focus, like I said, is Jinora. So the setup here is just that like the plane that they were on was sort of hit with a big gust of wind. It's sort of damaged slightly. They land on this sort of plateau. Asami's trying to fix it. She finds these kind of spirit kind of puffballs in the engine, and it's kind of like, oh, the spirits are sort of angry at us. They're trying to like break the engine. Jinora, do your thing, sort things out with the spirits, fix this for us. But she can't. She can't seem to connect spiritually enough to make it happen, especially when the plane is immediately in danger. There's like pressure being put on her in this situation. And she just kind of comes out and is just like, I can't do it. I'm struggling with this. And Asami just kind of comes over and is just kind of like, okay, I know it's a stressful situation, but we can talk this through. And that's what this whole story, most of it is. It's Jinora saying what the problem is. Asami gives her some advice. Korra gives her some advice. This helps her kind of through it. And this solves the little crisis that they have. Jinora does her spiritual stuff and we go on. Again, these are short stories, so there's only so much you can do. But I think in the kind of 9 or so pages that this story is, they do a lot in my mind. This is I think really strong stuff here, because effectively it's like Jinora being sort of stressed out because she is in a much more important position within the new air nomads. People expect a lot of her because of her spirituality, because she's an airbender master and she's being asked to like train a lot of the new recruits. And that stress is kind of affecting her in a way where it's affecting her spirituality, and she can't connect as strongly spiritually or meditate into the spirit world or use her spirit projection technique as easily. And she's having this kind of like personal crisis about this, that like this spirituality is such an important part of who I am. If I can't do it anymore, then who am I? So you get Asami able to help her out with like one part of what she's dealing with, the sort of stressful part of being more of a leader among the air nomads. Asami knows that because she is the owner. She runs Future Industries. She knows what it's like to have like that busy kind of business life, and that's sort of similar there, and she can help her there. Korra can help her more with that kind of personal crisis type thing. Korra knows exactly this kind of problem of like defining yourself by your kind of skill set, of like by her bending, by being the avatar. And there's some great just reflections from, say, Korra, especially in this, as like she reflects on like, I know what this is like because like the past avatars are lost. My journey through book 4, and the idea that I feel like I lost a piece of myself kind of during all of that. That all gets brought up, and they really kind of help to kind of bring her back on track. And just that idea of like these two kind of, older characters help this younger character, because like we've been there before, like a few years ago. We know what this is like. You'll get through this. And in a way, it's sort of, it's quite simple. It's just, here's my problem. Advice. Thank you. But it's really well done. And that's what I like about this. And in the middle of this, Asami has a little moment where she reflects on that idea of like, there will be things as you go forward that you discover. If I didn't reflect on the things I discovered, I never would have got together with Korra. So there's a nice moment like that between the two of them, and a really kind of nice, kind of beautiful spiritual moment at the end. There's a slight like technical point of the book technically says that Jinora is like, I can't go into the spirit world. But the technique that she's actually trying to do isn't actually like really involving the spirit world. It's just her projecting her spirit out of her body. She could project her spirit into the spirit world, but that is not actually what she does here. And I just think there's a bit of a sense for like, is that just the easiest way to word it so that people sort of get the idea? Or does the writer not actually get what how it actually works? And so it's not one of those things where it's like a slight continuity error, but it's a continuity error that's like present in the show. it's the same error as 107, and the whole idea of that, like Aang never goes to the spirit world in that episode, and that kind of fundamental misunderstanding that's been there, that they seem to have got past in Korra, but they've kind of brought it up again for some reason. It's just confusing. So yeah, Changing the Wind is fantastic. Weaver's Ball. Like I said, it's Korra during her training, starting her firebending training. This one is basically the restrictions of the compound. The teacher is then being more strict. You can't go to this festival that you want to go to. Korra sneaks out, goes to the festival, interacts with some of the kids. It's not particularly notable. She reveals she's the Avatar, makes a bit of a scene, lights something on fire. Everything sort of gets resolved, and there's a reflection just sort of at the end of it of basically the idea that it's like, Korra, we understand that you're struggling being in the compound, but this is kind of the way it has to be. We want to keep you safe. But they sort of bring the festival to her, and it's this idea of like, okay, so they do these sort of like gestures to allow her to experience some of these things, but it's always a sense of like, you stay here in the protected place and we'll bring the stuff to you. So it's sort of like a half measure where like it's not that every second of being in the compound is terrible and Korra's just locked up completely. She has experiences, but it's always like the people kind of bringing it to her and doing the things for her, and it's not her getting to experience things herself. So it's like this kind of like half solution to the problem. It's nice. There's a little bit of depth to it, but not too much. I definitely think this one could have had a bit more to it right at the end if they wanted to have a bigger discussion about the whole compound, but not really quite there. Like I said, I think this is Korra at about 13 or 14, so it's somewhat interesting. Last of the news stories, Cat Owl's Cradle, the Bumi and Milo story. This one really surprised me because I went in kind of thinking like, oh, another Milo story. I Lost Pets is fine, but it's not my favorite of the Free Comic Book Day books. So I was wondering, is this just going to be another kind of alternate iteration of that? Because it's obviously, the title includes an animal. Is it going to be about that? Surprisingly, the whole cat owl aspect of it is just that the island that they go to at the end happens to have a lot of cat owls there. It's not really part of the focus. But like I said earlier, the focus here is actually more about that duality of sort of Bumi using his experience with a parent who is busy, Aang, helping Milo through this situation as he deals with Tenzin, who is also being very busy. But Bumi is the one to bring Milo out on this journey. And they're going to this island that Aang used to go to meditate. He never brought anyone else to this island, so there's a little bit of a mystery to it. Why did he go here on his own? Why did he never bring anyone else here, not even Tenzin? So they're going to go there together. There's some hijinks, some action with some kind of sky pirates kind of thrown in here. But the main focus of this is definitely the interaction between Bumi and Milo and that reflection with the whole parent dynamic. There's some quite good stuff here as you really see that Bumi has clearly like evolved in a way as a character when it comes to this dynamic. We saw it in book 2, but now a few years on in kind of like post book 4 stuff, you can really see that the wisdom he's able to sort of like give to Milo, having directly experienced this himself, is very good to help him through this, while like acknowledging that like you're right to feel frustrated, but you also do have to understand like your father was a very important person who needed to do all this stuff. My father was too. But they do care for you. They do still love you in all of this. And there's an interesting moment where Milo kind of talks about it, and I think he mentions it to Tenzin at the start, that like, oh, I've nearly perfected my unique airbending move. Maybe I'll be close to getting my arrow tattoos. And he says this to kind of Bumi as well, and he's kind of like, the reason I want to do this is because maybe if I get my arrow tattoos, he'll start sort of, using me more in new air nomad stuff to like he does with Janora, and I'll get more time with him that way. And Bumi's kind of like, that's kind of like the wrong way to think about it. Like, don't earn the tattoos just for that, because you getting your tattoos won't result in Tenzin kind of like loving you more or caring about you more. He already does. Like, that will come with time, and it will be fine. But you have to understand that, like, him being busy and important, that's just like a factor of like who he is. And in a way, like, Tenzin comes to, Boomy comes to realize this about like Aang. And I think it's quite interesting when he says it. It's like, what is it he actually says? He says, I now realize in a way like that with Aang, everyone would always come to him for wisdom, for advice, thinking he has all the answers. But in a way, he didn't. He was just one person who was notable and known for these things, but was not the solution to everything. And so the kind of reveal at the end about the island is just kind of like that. Hey, Aang went here on his own to kind of relax, have some fun, because there's nothing super mysterious about this island. The island is more of a kind of fun, kind of weird thing, and not this crazy like island where there was this like secret guru, and there's a fun just aspect to it at the end, and I think it works quite nicely for the two characters. It's maybe again one of those situations where like it's maybe a little bit on the long side considering what the main takeaways are, when a story like Skyscrapers is only 4 pages long and could use more page count. But it's mostly pretty good overall. So to sort of wrap things up overall, I think, like I said, vast improvement over Team Avatar Tales. The new stories here are a lot better in general. I think there's some slight disappointments. I definitely think the Asami Yasuko story is too short. I wish, like, say, Mako was included somewhere in here, Bolin was included somewhere in here, and the variety was just a little bit better with regards to what characters are used and not used. But kind of ignoring that, the actual stories that we get, I think, in general, are quite good. My favorites are probably A Change in the Wind is, I think, overall the best story of the new ones. But Kadel's Cradle and the, I suppose, like, idea, the takeaways, in a way, like, just seeing some of the stuff, like, we get to see Yasuko in Skyscrapers is quite notable, and then the surprises of, like, Wisdom, a Gurulahima story out of nowhere, is quite good. Weaver's Ball sort of ends up, I think, of the new stories maybe being a little bit more on the kind of slightly disappointing side of things, but it's still, I think, solid overall. In terms of like a review score, like, this is not the book where, like, I'd say it's definitely not a 10 out of 10. I don't think it's a 9 out of 10. 8 seems maybe a little high. It's probably like a 7.5 kind of out of 10 book, where I do in general feel quite positive about it, but I don't feel most of it is like mind-blowingly like amazing or anything like that. It is the only proper new story content of the year, this plus Beach Wars, and in that sense, like, we haven't had an amazing year for comic content. And compared to the other story content that we've got this year, the Yang Chen novel, like, this doesn't quite feel up to that same standard, of course. But obviously next year the comics look like they're going to be a little bit better. But this one, for the anniversary year for Korra, 10 years, this is a nice book that's come out. But obviously, I think if it was properly to celebrate 10 years, I think there'd be a lot more to it. I think there'd be more short stories. I think they'd make sure to include every single character. I think just the fact that it is just the Korra version of this book kind of highlights that there's nothing special about this book for the anniversary as such. It was just initially scheduled very close to the anniversary and is now just about making it out within the anniversary year. But yeah, in general positives, I would say if you're interested in this, if you like the sound of a lot of these stories, you should definitely buy the book. I'm looking forward for my physical copy to arrive. But other than that, I'll just say I will be doing more kind of spoiler kind of analysis, breakdown of this, where I'll go more into sort of like discussing the exact details of what was said in each of these stories closer to the release of this book in November. But for now, I think that was a good sort of preview, basic idea of what to expect from the book. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on this, if you have any questions. But other than that, that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and Bye.